So it was a pretty wild hearing. It lived up to expectations. This really wasn't about Stephen Miran and his ability to serve as a Fed governor. It was about Federal Reserve independence. And very specifically, what that means is who is in control of the interest rate decisions. Is it the president or is it the Federal Open Market Committee? Right? That we're at, and that's this big question mark. And we've seen a whole series of events that have kind of pushed us in the direction of this White House really trying to exert a lot of control over interest rates. And to me, in Miran's hearing today, it is absolutely the case, and he said this as well, presidents, when they nominate someone to the Fed board, it's someone whose views they agree with, right? Like that, the president does have an influence on the Fed. This is not some pure, like totally devoid of any political contact. But there was more to this confirmation. And what to me was the real shocker was the idea that the White House is going to send him to the Fed and keep him on staff at the White House, which, I mean, a pretty clear reading of the Federal Reserve Act says that is not okay, but it just fits within a series of actions that really are pushing us towards a Fed that's under the control of the president. And that to me, that action was one that really caused concern, not the back and forth about, he's been in politics and he'll be independent. I mean, those are words. That's it.
Well, Claudia, if we can dive into perhaps some of the policy and some of the kind of proposals that he was suggesting that very much have aligned with what we've heard from the White House broadly. The one that stuck out to me is the fact that he said there is no inflationary effect when it comes to tariffs. He was pushed about whether tariffs are taxes. His response was any policy can be modeled as a tax on Americans. As an economist, is that true?
Yeah, see, this was part of the hearing that was really complicated in that, Myra right now is the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. He's part of the White House. Part of his job is to defend those tariffs, right? That is not, when he would be at the Fed board, like that is not his deal. Like it's how do you react to these tariffs? It's not selling them. He got questioning time and again about these tariffs, and he got really very few questions, if any, about his views on monetary policy. What do you think the neutral interest rate is? What do you think? You're not going to have a political official stand before Congress and throw under the bus the president's key proposals, right? I mean, that was, Democrats were asking these yes, no questions to get him to, he's not going to do it. He's in the administration and he's also a presidential appointee, right? So I think, fine, whatever. He did a lot of hedging. He, tiptoed around issues. I didn't appreciate when he tiptoed around some that I thought were very directly about the Federal Reserve, but it was a strange hearing.
Well, Claudia, we are less than 24 hours away from a jobs report tomorrow. And I feel like the closest he got to discussing the labor market and even discussing those dynamics was talking about immigration. And he connected the dots between the immigration policy, the White House's border policy, and inflation when it comes to housing. Can you just connect those dots for our global and our political audience, frankly, about how that relationship should work in theory?
Right. So I think absolutely going into tomorrow's employment report, we should be thinking a lot about how much immigration policy has changed in the United States in just the last few years, because these big declines in immigration in the country, a rise in deportations, that should be showing up in terms of slower job growth because we have less labor supply. There can be other things going on, but that will almost certainly be present in tomorrow's numbers that we can't read it out easily. Myron was talking about the inflation effects, and here, he was highlighting the how fewer people coming into the country. There's less household formation. There's less demand for housing. So that'll help push down house price inflation. Totally fine. What he didn't mention is it's also the case that immigrants come, they work, they help deal with labor shortages and keep, wages from really exploding and then potentially have that passed on to consumers. So my read and what I think the, different Fed officials have talked about is on inflation, it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of exactly how immigration sorts itself out. In the labor market, it's pretty clear it's going to slow things down in terms of our workforce, which means it's pretty clear it's going to slow things down in terms of our growth as a country.
So, Claudia, from your perspective, we've heard from folks on both sides of the aisle. We heard from Elizabeth Warren on the show last night. We've heard from plenty of Republicans in the White House as well. Everyone's saying the economy is receding, things are slowing down, recession is right around the corner. From your perspective, where are we?
So I would agree that things are slowing down. I do not see a recession right around the corner. I am watching very carefully what's happening in the labor market, because that will be decisive, and whether things really start to go south quickly. There were several policies that, as we could expect to have slower growth from. I mean, those tariffs, they are a tax. And that slows things down, at least in the near term. Maybe far in the future they create production, but they're going to slow things down. It's a tax. We've had less immigration. That slows things down. We've had a lot of uncertainty. That slows things down. So it's a question of where do we go from here? Are these very temporary effects? Are they ones that deepen? So I think that's the question we're in right now. I see much slower growth than we've had in recent years. But I don't see the falling off the cliff, but I think it is appropriate for the Fed and everyone else to be watching that risk carefully.
Tomorrow's the first jobs report since President Trump fired the head of BLS. There was a lot of talk about the quality of data in this hearing today. Stephen Miran would not acknowledge questions, refused to answer questions about the political motivations that President Trump had ascribed to the head of the BLS. How are you going to look at the data tomorrow now that this has taken place, and will the markets second guess the number they see?
I'm going to look at the data like I always look at the data. This is the absolute best read that we have on the U.S. labor market. We have world-class statistics. Yes, they can be better. Anything can be better. But they will give us a good read. It's going to be complicated, but it is not complicated because our data are falling apart. It's complicated because the economy is complicated. When we have these moments where labor supply is moving one direction, labor demand's moving in, it's really hard to read the data. And so I think tomorrow I'm just going to be looking at lots of pieces, keeping an eye on the jobs numbers, keeping an eye on the unemployment rate, looking at wage growth. You really have to look at all these pieces. And, you never take one number and run with it. That's just how it works in terms of measurement. But I have no qualms about spending a lot of time sifting through the data and trying to answer the question of where are we headed? What's going on?
Well, you wonder in the coming months, we'll see how the Trump administration handles the data. If this sends more people to private research, if ADP starts to rise on your list of credibility here versus government data. I know it's already a cottage industry, but are more economists going to be looking at private research because of this?
The using other data sources has been a growing trend for a very long time. And that's not necessarily about data quality coming out of the federal statistics. It's also sometimes you want a more granular approach. You want more timely approaches. Those are just not things the government statistics have been able to offer because, frankly, they're cost prohibitive the way that they do their work. And so I have no problem with the going out. But the idea that we're going to be, I don't think we're not there yet, but any time that is spent trying to figure out are the government data fabricated or somehow that's just going to be such a waste of time. And like I said, we're not there yet. There's no reason to do that. But we really should recognize for what this is. This is going to undermine the federal statistics that we have that, while could be improved, are really very valuable. So I don't know. We're not in a good place. This is pretty risky.